Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here, continuing Genealogy of Morals. We are in part 4. We're going to skip the first sentence and go to a question. What does the etymology of the terms for good in various languages tell us? I discovered that all these terms lead us back to the same conceptual transformation. The basic concept is always noble in the hierarchical class sense, and from this has developed by historical necessity the concept good, embracing nobility of mind, spiritual distinction. It'd be nice if you gave a lot of evidence there, but not a lot. This development is strictly parallel to that other, which eventually converted the notions common, plebeian, base into the notion bad. So for him, the fact that good means noble and bad means low or plebeian or common, that means that the word good was originally defined by the nobility, the upper class. Here we have an important clue to the actual genealogy of morals. That it has not been hit upon earlier is due to the retarding influence which democratic prejudice has had upon all investigation of origin. Now, he's getting a little long-winded on the point, and we are going to skip now to section 5 after I do his little footnote. We'll just let him finish his point. Footnote 1. The most eloquent proof of this is the etymological relationship between the German word schlecht, bad, and schlicht, simple. So there's only an E or an I in the middle. There is the difference. For a long time, the first term was used interchangeably with the second, without any contemptuous connotations as yet, merely to designate the commoner as opposed to the nobleman. About the time of the 30 Years' War, the meaning changed to the present one. So that's his evidence for what. Now, he says that he investigated the meaning of all these words and so on, and then he gives one example in ancient German or in Old German. Okay. All right, on to section 5. Many of the words and roots denominating good still to this day carry overtones of the meanings according to which the nobility regarded themselves as possessing the highest moral rank. Again, the idea of good comes from and is defined by the nobility. They speak of themselves as the truthful. Most resolute in doing this were members of the Greek aristocracy. Now we skip a long ways. Who knows whether modern democracy does not represent a throwback, and whether even physiologically the Aryan race of conquerors is not doomed? Good question. Is modern democracy a throwback? Is it really progress, or is it not progress? And the Aryan race of conquerors, are they doomed? Now, was Nietzsche a Nazi? All right, so we're skipping a lot now. We're skipping into section 6, and we skip down quite a ways. All the ideas of ancient man were understood, in a sense, much more crude, narrow, superficial, and non-symbolic than we are able to imagine today. The pure man was originally one who washed himself, who refused to eat certain foods entailing skin diseases, who did not sleep with the unwashed plebeian woman, who held blood in abomination, hardly more than that. At the same time, given the peculiar nature of a priestly aristocracy, there is from the very start something unwholesome about these priestly aristocracies, about their way of life, which is turned away from action and swings between brooding and emotional explosions. So originally the pure man was just someone who had some idea about don't eat things that have diseases, abhor blood, etc. Eventually the pure man became someone who is turned away from action and swings between brooding and emotional explosion. Now, what is the highest revered Westerner? As a priest or a monk, right? Or a nun, someone who gives their life to service, right? And that's a life of inaction. They are turned away from action, and they swing between brooding and emotional explosions. So that's what happens in a nunnery or a convent or whatever. They swing between amen and awe and humming and meditation which is brooding, and emotional explosion, which is probably possession by the devil or whatever they do when they go into confessional. So he's pointing out the difference between what is obviously the definition of a good man, which is just to not eat things with skin diseases and to stay away from blood, and a good man just follows some common sense things, to a good man being someone turned away from action. So he's pointing out something important for us to think about in the development of the idea of what is good and bad. Now you and I can look at that and say, aha, history of Christianity, here comes Plato, then Immanuel Kant, and now we have the results of Immanuel Kant's philosophy flushed out in Marx. So that's all you're doing there. For Nietzsche, he didn't see that, but all right, so we'll continue now. Not quite to section 7. Yet we are not right in maintaining that the cures which they had developed for their morbidities have proved 100 times more dangerous than the ills themselves. Humanity is still suffering from the after effects of those priestly cures. Right? So the cure through the priests of taking you away from action completely is far worse than whatever gave them the anxiety at the beginning to want them to go do this crazy thing of withdrawing from reality. Think, for example, of certain forms of diet, abstinence from meat, fasting, sexual continence, escape into the desert. Think further of the whole anti-sensual metaphysics of the priest, conducive to inertia and false refinement, of the self-hypnosis, encouraged by the example of fakirs and Brahmins. Now, possibly, or maybe not, I'll just mention it briefly, about self-hypnosis. That sitting there and humming, or singing, or chanting at the same sort of tone, or whipping your head around constantly, these are various ways of shutting down the mind. An African drumbeat circle, where for hours you just hear the same drumbeat and you dance around in a circle, swinging your head about, that's a way of lulling the mind. Anything that's endlessly repetitious is lulling the mind. You'll notice the difference between Greek poetry, where they say things like, "Did you seek truth? You will find it." And the Bible, where they've rewritten that as, "Seek and ye shall receive, knock and it shall be opened unto you, ask and you shall be given. For he who asketh receiveth, to him who knocketh it shall be open, to him who..." And they just go on and on and on. And the original Greek lines were so much better. All right, I'm getting off on other things. So yeah, they do try to hypnotize you with boring, repetitious, shutting down your mind. That is the nature of chanting, drumbeat, etc. In all fairness, it should be added, however, that only on this soil, the precarious soil of priestly existence, has man been able to develop into an interesting creature. Only here has the human mind grown both profound and evil, and it is in these two respects, after all, that man has proved his superiority over the rest of creation. All right, we can just accept that he said it without accepting what he said, because I don't think we had to have the Dark Ages and all the horrific things there to get to a more advanced stage. We could have skipped it if Plato had behaved himself a little more, and the people coming after him had chosen Aristotle instead of Plato. But it takes effort to think, and it's always easier to go the path of least resistance, and isn't that a rule of engineering, and doesn't that hold true for life? Now, 7. Excuse me. So much more difficult to edit my videos. I'm sorry, I don't edit things like that out anymore. By now the reader will have got some notion how readily the priestly system of valuations can branch off from the aristocratic and develop into its opposite. An occasion for such a division is furnished when the priest caste and the warrior caste jealously clash with one another and find themselves unable to come to terms. That's an odd idea that priests and warriors would fight. Who exactly would do the battling, and what exactly does that mean? It's true, though. I mean, the Pope, how many legions has the Pope, used to be a real question. We skip a little bit. The value system of the priestly aristocracy is founded on different presuppositions. So much the worse for them when it becomes a question of war. There we go. The question, or the statement I just visited. Who would do the fighting? So the priestly class has to be careful not to back themselves into a corner where they say they won't fight, and then they're trying to impose on other people. As we all know, priests are the most evil enemies to have. And why should this be so? Because they are the most impotent. Nietzsche. I mean, come on, how rich is he? So they're the most evil enemies because they're the most impotent. It is their impotence which makes their hate so violent and sinister, so cerebral and poisonous. Well, is their hate violent or is it impotent? I don't get it. Okay. The greatest haters in history, but also the most intelligent haters, have been priests. Okay, any examples? Besides the brilliance of priestly vengeance, all other brilliance fades. Still no examples? Human history would be a dull and stupid thing without the intelligence furnished by its impotence. Let us begin with the most striking example. Whatever else has been done to damage the powerful and great of this earth seems trivial compared with what the Jews have done. Did you know he was going there? I said earlier, we'll see if he's a Nazi, that priestly people who succeeded in avenging themselves on their enemies and oppressors by radically inverting all their values, that is, by an act of the most spiritual vengeance. Is that true? Did the Jews invert all values and thereby get back at society? This was a strategy entirely appropriate to a priestly people in whom vindictiveness had gone most deeply underground. It was the Jew who, with frightening consistency, dared to invert the aristocratic value equations, good, noble, powerful, beautiful, happy, favored of the gods, and maintain, and all those are with marks, slash marks, so that's one word. Let me do that word again. Good, noble, powerful, beautiful, happy, favored of the gods. All one term. They turned that over, and they maintain with furious hatred of the underprivileged and the impotent that only the poor, the powerless, are good. Only the suffering, only the sick, the ugly, are truly blessed. Now, was that Christianity that did that, or was that Jews? I guess Christianity comes from a guy named Jesus who was a Jew, right? So I guess the Jews did it. So he says, look at what the Jews have done. They foisted Christianity upon us. Christianity is that mindset where turning in and shutting down your mind is the most profound thing to do. Okay. But you noble and mighty ones of the earth will be to all eternity the evil, the cruel, the avaricious, the godless, and thus the cursed and the damned. We know who has fallen heir to this Jewish inversion of values. In reference to the grand and unspeakably disastrous initiative which the Jews have launched by this most radical of all declarations of war, I wish to repeat a statement I made in a different context, beyond good and evil. To wit, that it was the Jews who started the slave revolt in morals, a revolt with 2 millennia of history behind it, which we have lost sight of today simply because it has triumphed so completely. The Jews started the slave revolt, and there's now 2 millennia of history that hides that fact from us. Okay, is he against Jews? And if he is against Jews, is he against them in a more recent way? Or is he only against the 2,000-year-old guy? Interesting. All right, we will do section 8, and we skip. We're going to read almost all of section 8 except the first 3 sentences or so. From the tree trunk of Jewish vengeance and hatred, the deepest and sublimest hatred in human history, since it gave birth to ideals and a new set of values, grew a branch that was equally unique, a new love, the deepest and sublimest of loves. From what other trunk could this branch have sprung? But let no one surmise this love was represented a denial of the thirst for vengeance, that it contravened the Jewish hatred. Exactly the opposite is true. Love grew out of hatred as the tree's crown, spreading triumphantly in the purest sunlight, yet having in its high and sunny realm the same aims: victory, aggrandizement, temptation, which hatred pursued by digging its roots ever deeper into all that was profound and evil. Jesus of Nazareth, the gospel of love made flesh, the Redeemer, who brought blessings and victory to the poor, the sick, the sinners, what was he but temptation in its most sinister and irresistible form, bringing men by a roundabout way to precisely those Jewish values and renovations of the ideal. So he was some sort of revolt against the Jews, who brought the values the Jews were trying to institute anyway. Has not Israel, precisely by the detour of this Redeemer, this seeming antagonist and destroyer of Israel, has not Israel reached the final goal of its sublime vindictiveness? Was it not a necessary feature of a truly brilliant politics of vengeance, a far-sighted, subterranean, slowly and carefully planned vengeance, that Israel had to deny its true instrument publicly and nail him to the cross? He was their instrument. They had to deny him publicly. Okay. Why? Because that's a necessary feature of truly brilliant politics of vengeance. Far-sighted, subterranean, slow, carefully planned vengeance. All right, they nailed him to the cross like a mortal enemy, so that the whole world, meaning all the enemies of Israel, might naively swallow the bait. Is that true? They nailed him to the cross and they said, look, we're not going to let him do this, and thereby made him a hero to everybody. And the Jews did this on purpose? That's quite far-fetched. And could one, by straining every resource, hit upon a bait more dangerous than this? What could equal in debilitating narcotic power the symbol of the Holy Cross, the ghastly paradox of a crucified God, the unspeakably cruel mystery of God's self-crucifixion for the benefit of mankind? One thing is certain: in this sign, Israel has by now triumphed over all other nobler values. Israel wins. All the more noble values lose, because we've got this ghastly paradox of a crucified God, the unspeakable cruel mystery of God crucifying himself in order to make mankind more benevolent. So all this box of mysteries is enough to wow people and has supplanted other nobler values. All right, next is section 9. We will take a break at that point.